Welcome back to What You Need to Know for Audio Engineers. In this video, we are talking about virtual sound check. There are a couple of big main questions that you will probably have, like I had, if you are learning about virtual sound check for the very first time. The first question you might have is, what is virtual sound check? What does it do? How does it work? The next question that I also had, and that you probably also have as well, is what components do you need to make virtual sound check happen? And the last question, which kind of has the longest answer and the most possibilities, what is virtual sound check useful for? What can we use it for? And specifically, I'll talk about our church and how we at our church are going to be using virtual sound check from now on. Okay, so the first question, what does virtual sound check do? How does it work? This is, a little bit complicated if you don't know what Dante is. So hopefully you know what Dante is. Dante is digital audio network over Ethernet. We have certain channels in our board that are routed via Dante. So the audio from these sources comes through Dante. Dante is being used for that to send audio through the network, but also virtual sound check is using Dante to do the same thing, to send audio through the network. So that's a fundamental understanding that you need to have, is what is Dante. Dante allows us to send a certain number of audio channels through the network. So we have audio that's already passing through Dante. What we want virtual sound check to do is to take that audio and to send it to another place, which is the recording computer over here. You can see we've got Ableton open on the computer over here. That is where Dante is sending our audio to. So now I think is a good time to go to a close-up and see up close on the screen over here, on the I/O screen, what does it look like and what is actually happening here when we are using virtual sound check through Dante.
So here's a close-up of our I/O routing screen. You can see that we've got the virtual sound check tab is selected across the top. But if we go over to our inputs, all of these channels right here are routed on stage. You can see up on stage, all of them are routed through cables on stage into the mix box back in the back rack. So we've got all of these inputs routed through cables. But in virtual sound check, we can see we've got all those same inputs, but now they are routed through Dante. The audio is going through the cables from the instruments to the mix rack and out through the speakers. But also simultaneously, the audio from those channels is being sent through Dante. And it comes from Dante into our recording computer right here. So it is a way of sending, the same audio from the same instruments in the same performance to two different places via Dante and via all of our regular routing on stage through all of our cables. So hopefully that explains well enough what happens to the audio through the process of virtual sound check. It is being simultaneously sent to two different places at the same time. One is through the cables into the mix rack, and the other is through Dante and into Ableton. Now, one thing that's important to understand is that Dante is a two-way street. Audio can pass through these channels through Dante out into Ableton, but also they can come from Ableton through Dante and back into the soundboard through these same channels. So you can see the record send button is highlighted down there. When record send is active, the audio is passing from the soundboard through Dante and into Ableton. But we can select what's called the virtual sound check button, which is right next to it. And now you can see that things look a little bit different. Our channels turned orange. Now, what is happening with this virtual sound check activated, the opposite is true. Audio is passing from Ableton through Dante and back into the soundboard with virtual sound check activated. So record send is sending audio from the soundboard through Dante into Ableton, and virtual sound check, which is active right now, is the opposite. It is receiving audio from Ableton through Dante back into the soundboard.
Hopefully that answers the first question of what does virtual soundcheck do? And maybe by talking about that, it kind of answers the second question a little bit. But I will go back to the second question again of what components do we need to make virtual soundcheck happen, to be able to use it, to be able to implement it? Obviously, we need a soundboard and an audio ecosystem that is capable of running virtual soundcheck. You can't do this with an analog mixer because analog mixers most likely are not going to be able to connect to Dante Virtual Sound Card. So it has to be a digital mixer with a virtual soundcheck capability. And there are many different mixers, many different ecosystems from many different manufacturers that have this capability because it's just so useful and so common to use across the church world for sure. Dante is ever present in church production. But that's the first thing that we need, is a soundboard that can run a virtual sound check. And the next thing that we need is, well, we need Dante, obviously. We need to have a Dante network established and set up and running and working. This is just another network. Go onto your phone and look at your Wi-Fi. You'll be able to see your Wi-Fi network, your neighbor's Wi-Fi network, your work Wi-Fi network, all of the Wi-Fi networks that you have saved in your phone. The Dante network is just another one of those networks, but it is not run over Wi-Fi. It is digital audio network over Ethernet. So it is hardwired Ethernet cables that connect all of our Dante devices together. And we actually cannot use Wi-Fi to connect anything through Dante. Wi-Fi, not only can it not be used, it must not be used because it actually interferes with Dante. The next biggest component that we obviously need is a computer or some sort of device that is on the Dante network that we can send all of our audio to through the virtual soundcheck recording send process. For us, it's this Mac over here. It is on the Dante network, connected with an Ethernet cable in the back of it, and it is running a DAW. For us, it could be any DAW, but the DAW that we have is Ableton, and that is a recording software that we can configure. This isn't going to be a video about how to configure Ableton for Dante Virtual Soundcheck, but we configure Ableton to receive the audio from Dante on the channels that we want to. So there are the big three components that we really need. We need a soundboard that is capable of running a virtual soundcheck. We need a Dante network. We need a computer and a digital audio workstation to receive those recordings from Dante, and also the audio is going to come from that recording back through Dante to play back into the soundboard, into the speakers. That is going to be the next thing that we look at, is actually playing back a recording that we made at our rehearsal last night. We're going to play it back, and we're going to see the third question that we have that we're going to hopefully try and answer. How can we use virtual soundcheck? What is it useful for? And what should we use it for? And what are we going to use it for in our church from now on? We are ready to begin seeing how virtual soundcheck can be useful to us. So we've got a drum set, we've got 3 vocals, we've got a bass guitar, we've got a couple of guitar tracks as well, we've got all of our Ableton multi-tracks that we have running as well, we've got a piano. So I'm just going to hit play on our recording here. And now I've got our main channel fader down right here, but I can bring that up and we will start to hear our band playing this song last night. And this is the mix that I created last night for the band. And we can hear that it's playing and the vocals are about to come in here.
You make it easy to love.
Now I'm going to show you all of the individual control that we have over this. So I'm going to bring the mains back up so we can hear it. I can mute the band, and we can just listen to the vocals. And now I can go to our vocal channel over here, and I can bring in the background vocals behind them, or I can take them out. Let's say I want to go and listen to just the bass guitar. So I'm going to mute our drums, guitars, keys, tracks, and effects. And now we can hear just the bass guitars coming through. Now I can go over to our bass guitar channel on the board over here, and I can change the EQ on it. I can go to the compressor and enable a compressor. It doesn't actually have a compressor on it right now. Also, another thing to recognize is the meters are coming through, and you can see the drum set right here. All of the drums are getting the input from Ableton right here, from Virtual Soundcheck. Let's go over to the drums since we're right here. And let's see if we can go to the EQ, we can go to the snare, and I can EQ the snare. I could mute everything except for the snare, and I can just listen to the snare. One of the great uses for Virtual Soundcheck is for drums. Doing all the finicky little things that take a lot of time, like setting the gates on all of the drums. Let's just listen to the snare again. Now if I go to the gate and turn it off, there's a whole bunch of bleed in there. You can hear the toms, you can hear the cymbals, but I engage the gate. Now it's just the snare. That's something that takes a long time to adjust and set, is all the gate settings on the drums, making sure they're right. EQing the drums takes forever. Setting the gates takes forever. Finding good compression settings for the drums takes forever. We have like an hour and a half to rehearse, and we have to get through all the songs at least twice. You know, we have to do all the transitions, and we can't be taking 20 or 30 minutes at the beginning of rehearsal to just try and get the gates right on the drums. So we use Virtual Soundcheck. Virtual Soundcheck is also a great training tool for volunteers. If you're really uneasy or you're unsure about, making a mistake on Sunday, then you can use Virtual Soundcheck to come in when nobody's here, except for, the worship leader. If you're a volunteer, obviously you can't be here alone, but you can be here to mess around and just figure stuff out with no consequences. It's a great learning tool for you if you don't have a lot of experience, and if you're really unsure and uneasy. Take a month or 2 or 3 and get your hands on some Virtual Soundchecks and practice. The band gets to go home and they can take their instruments with them and practice every day. But the audio engineers, when do we get to practice? We're only here on Wednesday night for rehearsal, and then Sunday morning for service. So we have to make time to come into church and to pull up a Virtual Soundcheck and to practice EQing vocals, to practice setting the gates on the drums, to practice, finding the compression on an acoustic guitar, to practice balancing the instruments, to practice using DCAs versus instrument channels and learning all the ins and outs of all the functions of the soundboard itself. And it's just the time that you get to practice as a volunteer, it's just a lot more limited. So this is one way that we can use Virtual Soundcheck to actually get time to practice without having to have a band here, without having to worry about wasting anybody's time, without having any consequences at all. Just a huge, huge benefit to Virtual Soundcheck, and probably the biggest benefit to Virtual Soundcheck. But also, if we have a volunteer who comes in to rehearsal and is running rehearsal, and they're just, getting their sea legs, getting their feet underneath them, during rehearsal, I can make a recording of the band, as long as the gain is set properly, but I can record the band and I can mix them on another day. I can come in on Saturday, I can mix without the band being here, and that's a great benefit, because a volunteer can come and they can get experience interacting with the band and running a rehearsal. That's another thing that you need experience is actually running a rehearsal. You can do that as a volunteer, and then somebody with more experience can come in later and actually do the mixing and mix the band and make them sound good. It's not, a huge pressure-filled situation. There's no pressure at all with Virtual Soundcheck. It takes all the pressure away. You just come in and you play and you practice and you get better with no consequences. That's Virtual Soundcheck. That is why it is so valuable.